Welcome back to the deep dive. So, you've brought us a pretty dense stack of sources today. We've got historical timelines, economic analysis, some really deep engineering reports, and they're all trying to get their arms around, well, what might be the single most transformative era in human history? The information age.
It's a huge topic, and it's one we're still, living right in the middle of. We call it so many things. The digital age, the computer age, some people even call it the third industrial revolution. But to really understand it, you have to step back. You have to treat it like any other major historical epoch.
And that's exactly our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and track a revolution that completely flipped the script on what has economic value. I mean, the central question is, how did society pull off this massive, incredibly rapid shift from an economy all about atoms, physical stuff, factories, land,
Yeah.
one that's now centered almost purely on bits? How did information go from being a support tool to the main event?
That is the core question. We define the information age as a pretty distinct historical period. It starts right around the mid-20th century, and it's characterized by this incredible acceleration of information technology and the shift away from that old industrial age economy to one built on knowledge and data.
Right. And your sources are, they're incredibly comprehensive. They cover everything from the atomic physics of a semiconductor all the way up to these huge macro-level sociological changes. So our deep dive today is designed to trace that entire path from a single critical invention back in 1947 right up to the global, mobile, always-on world we have today. And by the time we're done, you, the listener, should walk away with the critical context for just how fast and how profoundly our world was remade.
Okay, let's get into this history, and I think to really appreciate the sheer speed of the information age, we have to start with what came before. We need a baseline. Absolutely. I mean, for thousands of years, humans have been trying to find better ways to calculate and manage data. It's a fundamental need. For millennia, we relied on purely mechanical aids, things like the abacus, the astrolabe, the slide rule.
Tools that help a single person think faster.
Exactly. But the Industrial Revolution, especially in the 1800s, that's when we see the first real steps toward automating data processing on a larger scale.
Which brings us to someone like Herman Hollerith and his punch card system. It's easy to forget now, but that was a monumental shift. It wasn't just about counting faster. It was a revolution in information management.
It absolutely was. Hollerith's devices, which he developed for the 1890 U.S. Census, were electromechanical. They used electrical currents to sense where holes were punched into these standardized cards. This took a process tabulating the census that used to take years of painstaking manual labor, and it mechanized it. It was essential for handling large-scale data well before we had a true electronic computer. It proved you could standardize information and process it with a machine.
Okay, so that sets a kind of baseline for mechanical data processing. Then we jump forward to the World War II era, and you get these massive, specialized analog computers. We're talking about room-sized vacuum tube behemoths, the ENIAC, the Z3.
Yeah.
Incredible engineering, but they had some pretty severe limitations.
Oh, massive limitations. That's the crucial point. Those machines, while you could call them digital in concept, were fundamentally constrained by the physics of their parts. They were hot, they consumed staggering amounts of electricity, and the vacuum tubes were so fragile they'd burn out constantly. You had teams of people just running around replacing tubes to keep the thing running.
So they were one-off, custom-built, multi-million-dollar projects. You couldn't scale them down. You couldn't mass-produce them for, an office or a home.
You couldn't. We needed a completely new kind of component to break through that size and power barrier.
And that component arrived in 1947. Your sources pinpoint this as the official starting gun, the critical catalyst that truly kicks off the information age. We're talking about the transistor.
Precisely. It was 1947 at Bell Labs. John Bardeen and Walter Hauser-Bratton, working in a group led by William Shockley, they demonstrated the first working point contact transistor. It was made of germanium. And it is truly hard to overstate the seismic shift this one little device represented.
So explain that for us. Why was this tiny piece of solid material so much more revolutionary than the entire room full of vacuum tubes it was designed to replace?
Because it solved all those existential physical problems in one go. A vacuum tube works by heating a filament boiling off electrons. It needs high voltage and it gets incredibly hot. All that heat is wasted energy, and it's what makes them burn out. The transistor is solid state. There are no moving parts, no vacuum, no filament. It operates on low voltage, generates very little heat, and it's incredibly small and durable. Just instantly vaporize the power and size barrier.
And the sources you brought make this explicit, right? The UN Public Administration Network points directly to this invention.
They do. They cite this breakthrough. the one that enabled computer miniaturization, as the single key driving force for modernized information systems and the social evolution that followed. It's a simple truth. If you can't make the machine small, you can't make it personal. And if you can't make it personal, you certainly can't make it global.
Okay, so the hardware is suddenly tiny and efficient, but that's just one piece. It's like building a faster highway. You still need traffic laws to manage all the new cars.
That is a perfect analogy. And that's where the second pillar of this revolution comes in, from Claude Shannon. A year later, in 1948, Shannon, who was a brilliant mathematician also working at Bell Labs, publishes a paper called A Mathematical Theory of Communication.
Now, for anyone listening who might not be familiar with that paper, break down what Shannon's theory actually provided. What was the traffic law?
It provided the entire theoretical bedrock for digitalization. He's the one who figured out how to mathematically quantify information in bits, binary digits. But crucially, his work also laid out the principles of data compression and error correction. He showed the fundamental limits of how much information you could reliably send over a noisy channel. Without that framework, digital communication would be a mess. Every time you copied a file, it would get corrupted. The whole system breaks down. His theory made it economical and, more importantly, reliable.
So once you have Shannon's theory, the software, so to speak, and the transistor, the hardware, the race was on. It wasn't just about building one transistor anymore. It was about figuring out how to cram thousands and then millions and now billions of them together.
And the acceleration was just phenomenal. The 1950s became this decade of rapid integration. In 1958, Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments creates the first integrated circuit, the IC. He basically figured out how to put multiple components onto a single block of semiconductor material. Right on his heels, Robert Noyce at Fairchild Semiconductor invented the monolithic IC chip in 1959, which made it much easier to manufacture.
But the sources you have really stress that the real pivot point, the thing that unlocked mass production, wasn't just the IC in general. It was a very specific type of transistor.
Yes, and this is the kind of critical detail that a lot of general histories just gloss over. We're talking about the MOSFET, the metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor. It was invented in 1960 by Mohammed Atallah and Anand Kong, again at Bell Labs. The MOSFET was the absolute game changer for scaling up.
Okay, so why? What made the MOSFET so much better for building these complex circuits than the earlier bipolar ICs from Kilby and Noyce?
It came down to two things, really: density and the cost of manufacturing. MOSFETs were just significantly easier to miniaturize. They consumed less power and were simpler to fabricate in these huge high-density arrays on a silicon wafer. So this technology allowed chip makers to just cram more and more logic gates into the same small space, which drove down the cost per function. This is what enabled what we call LSI, or large-scale integration. By the late 1960s, you had LSI chips holding hundreds of transistors, paved the way for the microprocessor.
So if you trace that arc, it's just astonishing. In about 24 years, we go from a fragile, glowing vacuum tube to a tiny manufacturable chip that could hold the entire brain of a computer.
That's the narrative. And that new capability, that incredible rate of growth it unleashed, it demanded a new set of, well, laws to even describe what was happening.
Right.
So if the transistor was the spark, then these exponential laws that governed its replication, they were the engine that drove the information age forward at a speed humanity had just never seen before. And to get it, you really have to look at two fundamental forces that are completely intertwined: computation power and storage capacity.
Let's start with computation, which is pretty much defined by that famous observation Gordon Moore made back in 1965. We all know it as Moore's Law. It states that the number of transistors you can fit on a dense integrated circuit doubles approximately every 2 years.
And what's amazing about Moore's Law is that it wasn't just a prediction. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. It became the roadmap for the entire semiconductor industry.
Yeah.
Engineers at Intel, at Texas Instruments, they used Moore's Law as their target. And because everyone was pushing for that same goal, this persistent, dedicated doubling of density just drove the cost of computing power through the floor year after year.
A task that would have cost thousands of dollars on a mainframe in the 70s became practically free 20 years later.
Exactly. And that continuous cost erosion is what made digital tools accessible, first to businesses and then to everyone, everywhere.
But all that processing power is useless if you have nowhere to put the results. You need somewhere to store all those bits. Which brings us to the counterpart law for storage capacity, often called Kreider's law.
Right. Kreider's law describes that same... Right. And there's this fascinating calculation from Fremont Riter in 1945. He figured out that the capacity of university libraries was doubling roughly every 16 years. And just think about that. 16 years to double the physical space for books. You're limited by land, by bricks, by mortar.
Compare that slow physical doubling to what happened with digital storage. And to do that, we have to start talking in these almost incomprehensible units. Exabytes and zettabytes.
An exabyte is a billion gigabytes. A zettabyte is 1,000 exabytes. The numbers are just staggering. Let's look at the stats from the sources to show the explosion. In 1986, the world's total technological capacity to store information was just 2.6 exabytes. And that's if it was optimally compressed.
2.6 exabytes, that sounds like a lot, but what does that actually mean on a per-person basis back in 1986?
It means that the entire world's stored information was equivalent to less than one single 730 megabyte CD-ROM per person.
Wait, less than one CD for every person on the planet? That's everything? All government records, all libraries, all business data?
Everything. It just shows you how information poor we were, technologically speaking. Now, let's do the jump. Fast forward just 21 years to 2007. World storage capacity had exploded to 295 exabytes.
Okay, what's the new per-person equivalent?
It's equivalent to almost 61 CD-ROMs per person. Not per year, per day.
That's just an insane leap. Okay, what about 2014?
By 2014, the scale just defies any normal physical comparison. It reached 5 zettabytes. The sources offer this analogy. The informational equivalent of 5 zettabytes is 4,500 stacks of printed books, stretching from the Earth all the way to the sun.
4,500 stacks of books from here to the sun. I mean, at that point, the physical world is just irrelevant as a measure. The information has been completely dematerialized.
That's the profound realization. The digital shift wasn't gradual. It was, as you said, a hostile takeover of information storage. In the late 1980s, less than 1% of the world's stored information was digital. By 2007, it was 94%. By 2014, over 99%. The physical constraints, the atoms, were just gone.
And the computation speed ran in parallel with this, right? Let's talk MIPS. Millions of instructions per second.
The growth there is just as mind-bending. The capacity of human-guided, general-purpose computers went from about 3 times 10 to the 8 MIPS in 1986 to 6.4 times 10 to the 12 MIPS in 2007.
Okay, and this is where we hit what I think is one of the most critical and honestly
In terms of raw operations per second, yes, vastly exceeded it. It's a staggering moment in history, and it happened, more than a decade ago. The tools are now running the race for us.
And the storage is similar.
It's a similar story. Estimates put the storage capacity of a single human brain at around 1 terabyte, maybe a bit more. Given the 5 zettabytes available in 2014, our global digital storage now matches that individual capacity on a per capita basis. We have effectively built an external collective brain, both in terms of speed and memory.
And the beauty of Shannon's information theory is that it wasn't just limited to computers. It started to be applied to biology itself, treating life as a form of data.
Precisely. After DNA sequencing was invented in the late 70s, genetic code became just another data stream to be rendered and manipulated. And you see the same exponential growth there. The amount of sequence data in GenBank, the public DNA database, has doubled roughly every 18 months. The information age isn't just about silicon chips. It's about applying digital principles to all forms of knowledge, including our own biology.
Okay, so the stage is completely set. The transistor gives us the hardware, Moore's law and Creator's law give us the scale. But now, how did this massive new capacity actually get out of the research labs and into the hands of billions of people? It required that foundational change, the conversion of everything from analog to digital.
And that conversion is the absolute prerequisite for the world we live in now. As we mentioned, it allows information to be copied perfectly without any degradation. For most people, their first real experience with this was in the 1980s, when CDs replaced vinyl records and cassette tapes. That was the first time the public got to experience the benefit of digital, quality-perfect sound every time that you could easily copy and share.
So let's trace this journey to ubiquity. The sources break it down into 3 pretty distinct phases of public access. Let's start with phase 1, from roughly 1969 to 1989. The rise of home computing.
It's funny, this phase actually began with a military project. The public's first real introduction to the concept of a network was when the first message was sent over ARPANET in 1969. But for the average person, the revolution didn't show up as a network. It showed up as a box on their desk.
Right, the 1970s brought the home computer. I mean, you had to load programs from cassette tapes. The interaction was all through a command line. But that era was so formative. It was defined by what's often called the 1977 Trinity, the Apple II, the Commodore PE 2001, and the TRS-80.
And you cannot forget the Commodore 64. When that came out in 1982, It hit a price point and a usability level that achieved true mass market penetration. It's often cited as the best-selling single computer model of all time. I think the sources say 17 million units sold through 1994. It made computing accessible, even if it was still mostly a hobby for enthusiasts.
And the adoption numbers from that time really reflect that early niche status. The U.S. Census data shows that in 1984, only 8.2% of American households owned a PC.
But here's the important detail, that adoption was generational. If you looked only at households with children, the ownership rate was almost double, at 15.3%. You can see parents buying these machines for their kids, for education, for games. They were seeding the next generation of users. By the end of this phase, in 1989, about 15% of all U.S. households had a PC. The machines were starting to get out there, but the crucial piece, the connectivity, just wasn't there yet for the public.
Which brings us right to phase two, 1989 to 2005. This is the era of mainstreaming the internet. This is Web 1.0. This is when the network finally breaks out of its academic and government silo.
And you really have to give tremendous credit to Tim Berners-Lee. He invented the World Wide Web in 1989, and it became publicly accessible in 1991. It created a standardized way for anyone with a computer to connect and share information.
But the early web was still pretty clunky for the average person,
Yeah.
right? Mostly text-based, hard to navigate. What was the thing that unlocked its mass appeal?
Usability. It was all about usability. And the breakthrough was the Mosaic browser in 1993, created by Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina. It was the first browser that could display images in line with the text. It sounds so simple now, but it was revolutionary. It gave the web a visual, intuitive feel, and the commercial world jumped on it instantly. By 1994, Stanford Federal Credit Union was the first bank to offer online internet banking. The digital economy was being born.
But we have to pause here and really emphasize the connectivity hurdle of the 90s. The sources remind us that just getting online was still a really complicated and often painful experience.
Oh, it was excruciating by today's standards. You had to configure modems, you had to deal with service providers like AOL or CompuServe, and most critically, you were on dial-up. Anyone over a certain age remembers that sound, that screeching handshake of the modem connecting. And it tied up your only phone line. And the speed was just a crawl, topping out around 56 kilobits per second. It severely limited what you could do.
But even with those hurdles, adoption was incredibly fast. By 1999, nearly half of all Americans were using the internet regularly. By 2000, a majority of U.S. households had a PC, and a year later, a majority had internet access. And this is when the revolution started to become truly global.
Which sets the stage perfectly for Phase 3. 2005 to the present, this is the age of ubiquity and mobile. This is Web 2.0. This phase is all about constant access everywhere.
The metrics for this final phase are they're colossal. The global internet population hits 1 billion in late 2005. By 2012, that number doubles to over 2 billion people.
And mobile just takes over everything. By the end of the 2000s, 3 billion people worldwide were using cell phones. But the launch of the smartphone was the real catalyst. It put a powerful, connected computer in everyone's pocket. By 2013, a majority of Americans owned a smartphone.
Let's bring those numbers right up to today for the listener because it really drives the point home.
As of 2023, the vast majority of humanity is participating. There are 6.31 billion cell phone subscribers. That's 78% of the entire world population. And 5.4 billion internet users, which is 67% of the world. The information age is now, without a doubt, a planetary phenomenon.
And the underlying infrastructure had to completely transform to handle that kind of volume. We saw digital TV replace analog broadcasting. Broadband became the standard connection in homes, and all of the speed and capacity enabled the next wave of services like cloud computing, which really hit the mainstream in the early 2010s.
But we have to talk about the unsung hero that allowed all of this to happen.
Yeah.
We talk about chips and computers, but the true circulatory system of the modern internet is optical networking. Fiber optic cable.
Okay, expand on that. Why was harnessing light for data so critical? Why couldn't we just keep using copper cables?
Because copper has immense resistance over long distances. The electrical signal degrades, it picks up noise, and there's a hard limit to how much data you can push through it. Light, traveling through these incredibly pure glass fibers, loses very little signal and can carry exponentially more information. But the real magic was the engineering that let us multiply the light within a single fiber. It's a technology called dense wavelength division multiplexing, or DWDM.
All right, break down DWDM in simple terms for us.
Think of a single fiber optic cable as a long garden hose.
Yeah.
With copper, you can only send one stream of water through it. DWDM is a technology that's like being able to send hundreds of different colors of water red, green, blue, yellow, all through that same hose at the same time without them mixing. Each color, or wavelength of light, is a separate data channel. This massive multiplication of capacity is why a tiny fiber optic cable can carry more data than a copper cable as thick as your arm.
And the results of that technology are what enable our modern world.
Absolutely. By 2018, these optical networks were hitting record data transfer rates, 30.4 terabits per second over a single pair of fibers. That's enough data to stream 1.2 million 4K HD videos simultaneously. That is the speed, that is the capacity that underpins global social media, e-commerce, and the cloud services billions of us use every single day.
So we've traced the tech, we've traced the hardware, but the most profound impact, really, is what all this did to society and to the economy. This revolution didn't just give us faster computers, it completely changed the conceptual model of what has value in the world.
It absolutely redefines the concept of value. And we can go back to Norbert Wiener, who wrote in his 1948 book, Cybernetics, that information is information, not matter or energy. And it's a profound statement. He was proposing that information is a third constituent part of the universe, right alongside matter and energy.
So if that's the theoretical model, then the core theory of the information revolution is that information's role fundamentally shifts. It becomes both a factor of production like capital, labor, and land, and, maybe more pertinently, a commercial product in its own right.
That's the economic paradigm shift. Before, information might help you produce something like a recipe helps a baker. Now, the information is the valuable thing. A software license, a stream of market data, a patented genetic sequence. This idea led the economist Fritz Machlup, as early as 1962, to talk about the knowledge industry, claiming it already made up 29% of the U.S. GNP. He was seeing the beginning of a whole new information sector in the economy.
Okay, let's tackle the most visible, and I think for many people, the most painful consequence of this shift, the great labor transformation. What happened to jobs, income, and job security?
The information age has created enormous wealth and incredible winners, but it has also put tremendous strain on traditional labor models across the globe. And you can see the strain in two parallel forces. The first is just straight-up automation displacement. Any task that involves routine calculation, repetitive decision-making, or predictable physical movements, it's vulnerable. Computers and robots just do those jobs faster, cheaper, and with perfect accuracy.
So jobs like data entry clerks, assembly line workers, even some mid-level management roles that are really just about routing information, those workers are forced to find something new to do, which creates huge pressure.
It creates immense pressure. The market starts demanding that workers shift into what the sources call indispensable professions. These are roles that require things machines aren't good at yet: creativity, complex human interaction, high-level engineering, scientific discovery, subjective consulting. They're high-skill, high-wage roles that can compete on a global stage. The brutal logic is, if you're not indispensable, you're replaceable.
And compounding that automation pressure is the second force, outsourcing.
Mhm.
Because of that global fiber optic network we just talked about, a programmer or an accountant in a developed country is now competing directly with a skilled professional in India or Eastern Europe.
Exactly. That digital infrastructure dramatically increases the global supply of labor for many of these traditionally middle-class jobs. And the result in developed nations is either wage stagnation for those who remain in those jobs, or they're forced to settle for low-skill, low-wage service jobs that can't be easily automated or outsourced.
But the other side of that coin is that the same infrastructure is a massive benefit for developing economies. It's a path to higher wages for them.
It is a phenomenal engine of opportunity for the developing world. The internet allows workers there to plug directly into markets they were completely excluded from before. And that translates directly into higher wages and better opportunities, lifting millions of people out of poverty by giving them access to the global economy.
Let's go back to that U.S. manufacturing example from the sources, because it just perfectly encapsulates this tension between creating value and employing people.
The data is just shocking. Between 1972 and 2010, the number of manufacturing jobs in the United States fell by 6 million, a massive drop. But, and this is the critical part, during that exact same period, the value of U.S. manufacturing, the actual output, rose by 270%.
So that's the core paradox. We're producing way more value with far fewer people. So where is all that new wealth going? Why isn't it translating into higher wages or more security for the workers who are left?
Well, the sources suggest that the value is accruing primarily to the owners of the information capital, The owners of the robots, the proprietary software, the patents, the algorithms that drive that productivity.
Hmm.
Industry has become more information intensive and less labor intensive. The value of the technology itself goes up, while the relative value of traditional human labor goes down.
This changes the entire model of how you even launch a successful company. It changes the role of capital itself. This is where the lean startup model comes from.
Yeah, contrast the old economic model where to succeed, you needed huge upfront investments in physical and human capital. Building the giant factory, hiring thousands of workers, getting massive loans. Contrast that with the digital paradigm. It's now possible for a small, inexperienced group with almost no initial capital like Mark Zuckerberg in his dorm room to create something that achieves planetary scale and success almost overnight.
The required capital isn't physical anymore. It's intellectual and informational. The leverage you get from software that can be copied for free and distributed globally, it just fundamentally changes the game.
It proves that in this new age, controlling the unique information asset is far more valuable than controlling the physical means of production.
So let's wrap this up by looking at the broader societal and cultural impact. Beyond the economy, what does this constant, ubiquitous access to information mean for us as human beings?
Well, there are two very different views on this. The sociologist Manuel Castells sees this as a profound transformation leading to a new society in the making. He talks about the autonomy of culture from its material basis. Because information flows so freely, culture and knowledge can now evolve and spread independent of geography or traditional economic power.
That sounds pretty optimistic. It suggests we're building a smarter, more connected, more knowledgeable global society because all of human knowledge is at our fingertips.
That's the potential. And it's also the paradox. Because while Castells sees that possibility, others, like the writer Thomas Chatterton Williams, offer a really strong counterpoint. He warns about the very real dangers of anti-intellectualism in the information age. The sheer volume of information is just overwhelming, and a lot of it is superficial, irrelevant, or just plain wrong.
So their argument is that the speed and volume lead to a sort of shallow engagement with knowledge.
Exactly. The culture starts to value speed over expertise. Why would you read a dense, difficult book when you can watch a 2-minute video summary? The greatest thoughts and works in human history are all available instantly. Yet there's this societal tendency to dismiss deep expertise and critical thinking as, sort of pointless in favor of quick, easily digestible content. We're basically drowning in information while starving for wisdom.
This has been an incredible deep dive, covering 7 decades of just radical, world-altering change. We started with that spark in 1947, the transistor. We watched it ignite the exponential engines of Moore's and Kreider's laws. We charted its incredibly swift journey through those 3 phases of adoption, from military networks to the global mobile network we have now, all running on the unbelievable speed of light through fiber optics. And we've seen how it redefined information as the core economic asset, causing this ongoing massive structural change to labor and capital all over the world.
The single defining characteristic when you look at it all is just the speed. The Neolithic Revolution, which gave us agriculture, that took thousands of years to spread across the globe. The Industrial Age took hundreds of years. The Information Age achieved planetary saturation in just a few decades. That pace of change is completely unparalleled, and it presents challenges that, frankly, humanity has never faced before.
Which brings us back to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away from all this. We talked about that cognitive benchmark, how by 2007 our computers had already surpassed the collective processing power of every human brain on Earth, and how our global digital storage capacity now matches the storage capacity of an individual human brain on a per-person basis.
So what are the philosophical and practical implications for human relevance? When our own tools can not only remember more than us, but can compute faster than our collective minds. The sources suggest the next great challenge of this age is shifting our focus away from just acquiring raw information. Machines do that better than we ever could, to generating actionable knowledge. The future, you could argue, belongs to the age of algorithms. Algorithms designed specifically to convert this overwhelming universe of existing information into meaningful, useful actions. The question then becomes, how do we make sure that human wisdom is guiding the machine's incredible processing speed?
That is the ultimate question of relevance moving forward. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the structure and history of the information age. We hope you walk away better equipped to navigate the dense sea of bits that we all swim in every day.
Continue your own deep dive, and we'll see you next time.